Is that our music playing? It's Randy in the background.
Okay.
All right, we're ready to go. Melissa, we're ready to go.
All right, sounds good. Good evening, everyone. The Farmington School Board meeting has come to order. First of all, I need to read a statement. Due to the current federal and state emergency declarations, this meeting of the Farmington School Board is being conducted in accordance with Minnesota Statutes 13D.021, meetings by telephone or other electronic means. So now I'm calling this meeting to order. Roll call vote, please, Lori.
Member Doyle?
Sorry, did you say me? Because I just cut out. I apologize. Yes, here.
Yes. Member Saucer?
Here.
Member Christensen?
Here.
Member Carraro?
Here.
Member Simmons?
Here.
Member Coletta? She's absent. Thank you.
All right. Roll call has been established. The next item of business is public comment. We don't have any public comment to report tonight. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Simmons, second by Carraro. Roll call vote.
Member Christensen?
Approved. Yes.
Member Carraro?
Yes.
Member Doyle?
Yes.
Member Simmons?
Yes.
Chair Saucer?
Yes, motion passes. We have an agenda. All right, the next item of business is the good news with our superintendent. Superintendent Burke, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Saucer, members of the board and the community. A few exciting things to share. We got a packed meeting tonight, so I'll try to go quick. The first thing is I would like to recognize Ms. Bree Ostoff, our community ed director. She was recognized as a state community educator of excellence by the Minnesota Community Education Association. So congratulations to her and the great work that she's done and with her community ed colleagues and continuing to raise the profile of the programs that we offer in the district. Exciting week last week, had an opportunity to join a couple of virtual science fairs. Meadowview and FES both had virtual science fairs. And so just another really cool example throughout our district of not being able to do things exactly the same, but still offering great experiences for kids. So Meadowview learners actually created their presentations and used QR codes. And then we were able to scan those QR codes and see the presentations that the kids had made. And then FES learners, they created videos and then shared those out via a Google folder. So again, people in the community could see those and provide feedback and comments. So really, really cool opportunity, even though it's not the typical thing that we've seen with our science fairs. FES is also finishing up their virtual book fair this week. So again, another opportunity to do things that we typically do this time of the year, just making them look differently. Along that lines, FHS is going to have a virtual post-secondary fair next week. So there's more information on the FHS webpage. So if people are interested in learning more about all the different post-secondary options that are out there for our secondary kids, if they go to the FHS homepage, they'll be able to sign up for that and take advantage of that really cool opportunity. Just a heads up that we're heading into standardized testing season. Even though it's not on the forefront, Minnesota is still requiring that school districts provide that opportunity. There's a little bit of disconnect between the state and the federal government in terms of what those things could look like. But right now, we need to continue to move forward with our plans to provide those opportunities for our students. And we just want to remind people that families always have that option, especially given our current circumstances, to opt to not have their learners take that. And if they have questions about that, they can contact their schools to get more information. We also have information on our homepage regarding the different assessments that we give and talks about how each is used and what kind of information that can give each learner. So if people are looking for that, if they go to our homepage and under families and under assessments, they can find that information. I got some good news on the state budget front last week. Our early budget pieces we were getting from the state had a deficit, then it was a slow surplus, and then last year they reported a potential $1.6 billion surplus for the biennium. Now, there's still lots of things they're trying to figure out with that. Is there some one-time money in it? There's some other savings. But overall, that's good news for not only the state, but for school districts. Quick vaccination update. We are now have provided the opportunity for all of our staff to choose to take that vaccination. So we're through every one of our staff. So by the end of March and early April, anybody that wanted that vaccination should have their second vaccination. And Dakota County really stepped up over the last week. They started last Monday and they gave us 50. And then on Tuesday, they said, well, we have 375 and we need to fill them fast. And so we Marianne punched a bunch more out to our staff. And then they followed up the next day with another 137, which allowed us to accelerate and get through that. So we're happy to say that we provide those opportunities in the next little over a month. Everybody should have gotten both doses that they wanted. And then finally, just want to share that I'm going to have an opportunity to share and testify in the Senate K-12 Policy Committee again. They're looking at their policy bill, which has some really cool language around seat time, the opportunity to provide distance learning again for families and not be an online provider, and also innovation zone bill. So I had the opportunity to do that earlier, and I guess I get called back, so I'm going to talk about it a little bit. Not quite as much time this time, only 2 minutes. So I'm going to most certainly going to have to write down what I'm going to say. Otherwise, I will be muted after that comes in. So yeah, it is hard. So Chair Saucer, board members, that's what I have for the update this week. Thank you.
Nice job lip reading there. I was worried I had my mute on, not on. All right, we have our student school board members today. Who would like to go first?
I can start this week.
Go ahead, Grace.
Yeah, so for speech, this last weekend we had the Shakopee tournament, and Shakopee is one of the hardest tournaments. It's a big tournament, and there's a ton of schools there, and Farmington actually placed 12th out of 27 teams, so that is really good. And we actually had several people place in the top 6 in their categories, which is also super impressive because there was some tough competition there this week. So super exciting for the Farmington speech team. Student council, we are still planning some fun events coming back to school and dealing with we're going to try to do some coronation and some homecoming activities, which is super fun for the seniors and has been super awesome to kind of work on planning. Debate is starting to kick up practices for next season and looking at the topic. It's super fun for all these activities because we're starting to get more and more in person. So whether that's in smaller groups or socially distanced, just in person, it's getting increasingly more fun. So that is really encouraging to see. As well as coming back to school, I've heard from a lot of people that they're super excited to be coming back to school fully at the end of the month here at the high school. And overall, just starting off the trimester this week has, from what I've heard, gone good. And hopefully the rest of the week and the other cohorts have similar positive things to come back about. So yeah, we're all super excited to be starting a new try and coming back. So yeah, that's all I have.
All right, Elise,
So for my sorry.
Fine.
So for my update, going off of Grace's hybrid learning, a friend and I were actually discussing how at the beginning of the distance learning that we could really just get everything done at home, and then slowly that kind of dissipated. And the first week that I'm back, so last week, I honestly probably got more work done in those 2 days than the whole week just because I was in school. And so that was really great. And I'm really excited that eventually we're going to go back into the full in-person learning on the 29th. With Best Buddies, we had our February event, and it was our first in-person event. That was like a craft bonding night, and that was really fun. It was great to see everyone there. It was and we just connected and just did crafts, and it was really great. For FCCLA, on I think March 19th, we have our breakfast bonding. So we're going to show up at the school in person and just eat breakfast and then talk. It's going to be our last event simply because it's just difficult to really, there's just so many other extracurriculars that involve volunteering and stuff. And sometimes like those clubs, especially with COVID, can't get enough like participation or volunteering events and experiences. So that's just going to be our like end all for the school year until next year, when hopefully things get better with COVID and we can restart FCCLA again. So yeah, that is my update.
Thank you for sharing both. I know, Grace, it was great to see you in the Instant Command Team committee last week and being able to share your opinion on that. So I know it was much appreciated. So I appreciate the participation and what you guys are able to share with us as well. So thank you. All right, our next item of business is the consent agenda. The consent agenda is made up of routine business items that can be acted upon with one motion. If any board member wishes to discuss an item, they may request that it be pulled from the consent agenda and will be acted upon separately. Does anyone have an item they wish to discuss? All right, seeing none, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as stated.
Second.
Motion by Quero, second by Doyle. Roll call vote, please.
Oh. Board Member Doyle,
Yes.
Member Coletta,
Yes.
Member Simmons,
Yes.
Member Christensen,
Yes.
Member Carraro,
Yes.
Chair Saucer.
Yes. Motion passes. The consent agenda has been approved. All right. The next item of business is reports and communications. We have a guest here, Johnny Villarreal from the Bureau of Mediation Services, and also Marianne Thomas with our HR department, and they'll be talking about interest-based bargaining. Welcome, and go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Saucer, members of the school board. It's our pleasure to have Johnny Villarreal from the Bureau of Mediation Services tonight, and his colleague Tiffany is trying to join the board meeting, but we're having a little technical difficulty there, so I don't know if she'll be able to join or not. But anyway, the school board did have an interest in learning more about interest-based bargaining. And so we did ask one of the mediators from the Bureau to come meet with us tonight and share a little bit of information about what interest-based bargaining is. If you were to really go into in-depth, this is a day-long training. So we are going to get the shortened version of just a brief overview of what interest-based bargaining is about. We have about 30 minutes of presentation plus time for question and answers. So Johnny, I'm going to turn it over to you if that's okay.
Sounds good, Marianne. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. And Marianne, are you able to share with that PowerPoint, or
I got it.
I'm not sure how that will work.
Jason's taking care of that today.
Great. So let me know when that's up. And
Can we see this?
It's loading. Yes, we got it. Page 1.
everyone can see it, I hope.
Yes.
All right. Good evening. As Marianne said, my name is Johnny Villarreal. I am a mediator with the Bureau of Mediation Services. The Bureau is the state agency charged with administering the Public Employment Labor Relations Act, which includes things like mediation, both for grievances and contracts. It includes interest-based collective bargaining, facilitation, and training. We also do labor management facilitation and training. I'm a hearing officer doing unit clarification certification hearings. We certify elections. And then a little bit about me. I'm coming up on my 15th year with the Bureau, and also a serving Army National Guard member. Spent 2018 in Afghanistan working casualty operations as commander there. So that's a little bit about me. The agenda for today, looking to cover some of the topics that we covered during the full day training that Marianne touched on. I'll cover some definitions that IBCB works with and the steps of IBB, and then a recording document that parties have used to record each issue and the resolution to each issue. And then talk about the difference between interest-based collective bargaining and traditional bargaining and some of the differences there. And then we'll be able to take any questions that you might have after that. With that, next slide, please. So in the full day training, we will cover things like conflict, and there are different types of conflict that we cover: data, structural relationship, value, and interest. Communication, we really hit hard on. Active listening, persuading, perception. Interest-based collective bargaining really looks at consensus-driven decision-making. And so we spend a lot of time on how to get to consensus and what that looks like. And then looking at the end of the day for that training, we'll do some format description as far as what the steps are and how you get there, some of the specifics dealing with each issue, and then some of the foundation documents and the process that we'll go through after that. A lot of the day is also exercises in each of those areas, so it really hits home the topics that we're trying to cover. So some of the definitions that we cover: issues is the subject of the negotiations, or the what is the problem to be solved. We sometimes will identify that issue as a question to be solved. And then the interest is the why or the reason behind that problem for each side. So again, consensus-driven problem-solving type of a format where both the union and the employer all are on the same page in the same room. There generally is no caucusing, so you're going to be in the same place the whole day. We generally will go every other seat to make sure that it's consensus driven that way, and it stays away from positional type of bargaining. So a position is a proposed solution to an issue, regardless of what the interests are. And an option is a proposed solution that has the issue and satisfies one or more of the interests of both parties. When you come up with an option, it's measured against a standard, and that standard is agreed upon qualities, and again, by consensus, of an acceptable solution based on objective criteria or norms. The easiest one that I can give you on that is the standard of, is it legal? So you might have an option, for instance, hey, let's do a 3-year contract with the teachers. Well, teachers by law are held to a 2-year contract in the odd numbered years. You can't do a 1-year or a 3-year with them. Or public sector cannot have a contract more than 3 years. So if an option were up there about, hey, let's do a 5-year contract, you would measure that against the standard and it wouldn't meet that legal test. Next slide. Negotiations continued. Negotiation is a process in which two or more parties with common and conflicting vested interests come together voluntarily, and that's important to relay as far as the union and the employer both voluntarily will participate in an interest-based collective bargaining process. If one side or the other wants to withdraw from the process, it's over. And so it's very much voluntary on both sides. And to put forth and discuss explicit proposals for the purposes of reaching the agreement, right? So that's the ultimate goal in either negotiations or interest-based collective bargaining, is to reach an agreement, get a contract, right? And then consensus, the definition: all members must agree on the option or options, and can honestly say, I believe that all members understand my point of view and that I understand theirs, and whether or not I prefer this option, I support it because it was reached fairly and openly, and it satisfies the interests acceptably using the agreed upon standards. So the consensus piece may not have been my preferred option, but I can live with it, and the entire group will move forward with whatever the decision is. That's what basically consensus means. Next slide. So when we go through the steps of interest-based collective bargaining, we start with the preparation phase, and the surveys, which are basically both sides. The school board would talk about what issues you want to talk about and resolve in the contract bargaining. The union would do the same and really talk about what are the problems or concerns or issues for the IBCB team, which includes both the employer and the union, to discuss. And what are the underlying needs behind that? Why does the issue need to be resolved? What happens if the issue is resolved or isn't resolved? Those are some of the things that can be discussed in the survey process. And then you enter into a process agreement, which basically talks about who's going to be at the table for each party, how many, what's a quorum. So what constitutes a quorum where you can still meet, meeting arrangements, when, where, kind of those logistics pieces. Cost, is this on paid time, not paid time? All of those types of things are discussed in that process agreement. What's the recording process? What's your communication going to be as a part of that process, both internally and externally? So those are some of the topics that get discussed in that process agreement. Norms of behavior are basics. A lot of just respectful behavior gets put out as far as what behaviors will help you function the best, and what behaviors will help you make the team function most constructively, what behaviors should you avoid. And you can create that list as a group by brainstorming and prioritizing and then evaluating those norms of behavior. And then the final list of norms ends up being agreed upon by consensus. And then I talked a little bit about the standards piece, that they're agreed upon qualities of acceptance solutions based on the criteria and norms that the parties reach together. And then identifying standards, issues, interests, the definitions that I went through. The next step would be developing options based on each issue. And so that's really a brainstorming exercise where you can just throw up, you look at quality, or quantity, not quality. You're just trying to get as many ideas up on the table as you can for resolving the particular issue. And then sometimes the final resolution might be a combination of those once you evaluate those options and then select one of those options to resolve the issue. And then the final step is to essentially write that final written agreement on that particular issue. Now, this process from the start of preparation through your final resolution is a longer process than the traditional bargaining as far as time commitment. And obviously time is a resource, right? So we always talk about that in the training and talk about expectations as far as how long that's going to take. So when you look at the issue recording document that's up on the screen, really, you'll list out all of the interests of the union. You'll list out all of the interests of management on a particular issue. You'll identify the standards that you want to measure against for the options. And sometimes you'll brainstorm those options and then list high, low on if it's a high probability of passing or a low probability that you can live with. And then select whatever that is and then write out the tentative issue. We generally will say you're going to look at about 8 hours per issue. So sometimes if you've been coming to the table with, say, 30, 40, or 50 issues that the parties are working on, just do the math on that and how long that will take. So it's important when you go forward and you do your surveys that the parties look at really prioritizing what do you want to bring to the table, because it will take longer than traditional bargaining. Next slide. So really talking about the differences between traditional bargaining and interest-based, going from the bottom up on the traditional side. Basically, the parties come to the table, present their proposal, and it's sort of like a tennis match, right? Where your party one proposes something, party two evaluates it and counter proposes, and it goes back and forth across the net, back and forth until either you've reached an agreement and the more powerful party prevails, or the proposal's dropped. Interest-based, the parties together by consensus agree on the norms and process, and then mutually agree on what the issues are that you'll work on. The parties discuss their interests. The parties discuss the standards that you're going to measure those options against. You brainstorm options. The parties evaluate the options and against the interests and the standards, and then reach a mutual agreement by consensus. That's for every single issue. So as you're going through that recording document that was on the previous screen, that's for every single issue. So it might be wages, general increase, might be that particular issue. It might be 403B. It might be health insurance. It might be time off, subpay, whatever it is, right? So those issues, each one of those goes through that process and takes that time to do that. With that, I thought I'd leave you with a recent story that was in out of the Minnetonka School District, and I thought it was a powerful statement from the board chair that they were going through some controversial issues with a particular person of the day and that type of thing, and they were struggling with a response to that and how to deal with it, right? And he said, we're evolving together as a school community, and as we do this, let's do our best to honor everyone's journey, to move forward together, to assume positive intent, to open our minds to others' perspectives, to listen and learn from each other. The board is committed to this, and we hope that each person hearing this will commit to it as well. So it seemed like a good message to just go into each issue, each problem with an open mind and understanding, and assume positive intent. So I will take any questions you might have.
Johnny, I'll turn it over to Melissa.
I'll do my best. It's so hard to read on Zoom sometimes. So it looks like Steve's got a hand up. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah. So, Johnny, I guess my question on this specifically is if we start down, if both parties agree to this and we start down this path, because again, the time commitment and filling out the documents and stuff, and all of a sudden one group decides, you know what, we don't want to go down this path anymore. So you said that at that time, then we'd have to start over with the other process. Is that correct?
Let me walk through what I've seen in the last 15 years and the decade before that as an advocate. Interest-based collective bargaining can be a good way, even if it doesn't walk all the way through to a final agreement. What it can do is help the parties understand the issues better. So if it were to devolve into or evolve into a traditional bargaining process, the issues that you've identified are still on the table. You're still bargaining on those particular issues. You just move into a positional process where you present a proposal, the other party responds with a counter proposal, etc. So it is not unusual for that to happen. So you're not starting from scratch when this process, if this process were to end, and you go into that positional bargaining with a better understanding of what the other party's interests are and what the standards might be and what possible options might be out there for resolving it.
But I see more positive about it. Basically, what you just said is identifying each side's entity on that and really digging into that. I like that. My only concern would be, and again, this would be my first go around being on the negotiating committee, is if they bring 100 items, now it's up to the other side to break them down and identify specifically if those are the specific ones they want to go through.
In interest-based, the parties by consensus agree on the issues. So both parties would have to agree. If the BMS is helping to facilitate interest-based collective bargaining and the parties come with 100 issues, we're going to recommend you do not do IBB.
Okay. Thank you.
Hannah, looks like you've got a question. Go ahead.
Hi, Johnny. Thanks for the helpful overview. You just mentioned that this is typically a facilitated process, something that we would do as a district with the support of a professional like yourself.
Correct.
Okay. And in terms of cost to the district, is that something that ends up being a flat fee, or is it something that's based on the total number of hours invested at the end of the process? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. The Bureau is a state agency, and we do not charge for our services for the public sector and private sector for that matter. So we would come out, facilitate, and work with the parties to get through that, and would be no charge from the Bureau. If the parties wish to have an advocate paid, that would be on the parties, and or any bargaining time that might be out there, that because we traditionally will do this during the day. So you're looking at subs and sub pay and that type of thing to get coverage. And then again, the process is longer, so those ads can, or costs can add up, but there is no charge from the Bureau.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thanks. And then in terms of the time investment that you mentioned, would you say that while the time commitment is more significant in interest-based collective bargaining, that more of that work is done behind the scenes or independently, like surveys, or I guess less time at the table physically together, so to speak, and more, more shared work outside of that amongst the teams before they come together?
That can depend on the parties and their process agreement. So I've seen some of that time obviously will be on that preparation piece, but that's generally done together by consensus as a full group. If the process agreement allows for subcommittees to do some of that work, which I've seen, then a lot of times that can be done between meetings of the full group, and then the subcommittee will come out, report out to the larger group, and then the larger group will have that final decision by consensus.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thanks a lot.
Member Carrero, your hand is raised. Do you still have a comment, or did you forget to lower it?
It's down now. Thank you.
No problem. Does anyone else? I have a couple questions, but I don't want to go first if anyone else has anything right now. All right, the first thing I'd like to ask is, what percentage of districts within the state are you aware of that do the interest-based bargaining versus the traditional style? Estimate, do you have any idea?
Yeah, I can't give you a statistic on that. There probably have to be some analysis on that. The vast majority of the mediation petitions we get are traditional. And the interest-based many times are experienced. That they will do it every contract cycle. And so we get a lot of the same folks that want refresher training and will continue going through that. We also have the ability to do co-chair training or facilitation training to help the parties do it subsequently on their own and can work with the parties that way.
I used to also represent Farmington on the 917 board, and we have had interest-based bargaining for a very long time. And this is one reason why I was hoping to bring it up. I had the opportunity of serving on the personnel committee this last year when we negotiated with the paraprofessionals, and it is intensive time-wise for the parties. But what I found from it personally was it was it was less hostile than some come negotiations can be. Not saying things have been hostile, but just in terms of at the day one, we knew what the issues were from both sides. The day one, we've had our superintendent be the facilitator because we've been doing it for a while. And he said, day one, this is what the percent we're looking at. Now let's work about the issues. And we went kind of straightforward, and we had the time to work through the issues. And there were some that took time, but the committee that had been working together, there were times things got tense, but it was also just a very decent sense of community that we're all there together and we're just kind of working on the pieces. And I really like that aspect, and I like being able to kind of take time with it. It also allowed those on the committee to be able to weigh their feelings and concerns that they had had themselves, so they had heard from other members, which took the time now, but during the negotiation process. But what we have found as a district and what I've heard is that when you take the time with those issues during negotiations, there are less likely to be grievances and continuations of problems later. I don't know if you could if you've had experience kind of seeing that with your experience as well, but I was very impressed with how the process worked, and having seen both sides of the table, so to speak, I was intrigued with the style.
Sure. As I stated that many times, even if the parties move to traditional bargaining, they have a better understanding of the issues and the interests of both sides when they do that, having gone through this process. And some issues lend themselves better to this process than others. If you are at the table and the parties can't agree on the size of the pie, so to speak, for the economics, that might be tough to start there, right? But if there's another issue, perhaps you can look at an issue or two or three that lend themselves better to this as an introduction to this process and work on them that way. There may be a way to gain some momentum and continue to work on the other issues that way as well.
So it sounds like you're suggesting like a hybrid model of sorts for issues that need to be addressed. And then that's an interesting idea. How does the process work? Say that's something the board would like to do. Does the board have to agree and then the union team have to agree? Is that how it moves forward? What would the steps be if we did want to go in this direction?
Before you would come to the Bureau, both parties would have to agree. So whatever your process is as a board, whatever the union's process is as a union, that's up to the parties. Before the Bureau will get involved, we will need a joint petition for interest-based collective bargaining. We will not move forward if only one party is requesting it.
That makes sense. I appreciate that. Are there anyone else have any comments or questions, or even if Mary Ann or Jason would like to add anything as well?
No, I think that was a great overview. Thank you, Johnny.
Great.
Anyone else? All right, well, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure we'll get back with you if we have any other questions. I appreciate your presentation today.
Sounds good. We do have a lot more information on our website. So if you go to min.gov/BMS, you can find a lot more information on this topic.
Great, thank you.
Have a good evening.
You too. All right, so something to digest and think about. Our next item of business is a secondary learning model update with Superintendent Berg and Mr. Bossman.
Thank you, Chair Saucer, members of the board. I'm going to switch screens here for a little bit. Let's see if we can be 2 for 2 here. That pop up for everybody? Yeah. All right. I can't see, so I need. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. All I see is my screen. So, all right. So we want to take an opportunity to provide an update to the board and the community where we are with our transition with our secondary learners transitioning back to in-person learning. Just want to give a brief update on kind of where things started again. Like things have happened over the last couple of months. It starts with Governor Walz announcing a significant change to the Minnesota Safe Learning Plan, which happened on Monday, February 14th. And out of that, that updated Safe Learning Plan allowed secondary students to return to hybrid or full in-person beginning February 22nd if they were able to implement additional mitigation strategies, which we'll get into a second, with the goal of all secondary learners being in either hybrid or full in-person by March 8th. Now, the good news is prior to this update, our secondary learners had already started back in, and obviously today's March 8th, and our secondary learners have been in for 3 weeks for most of them and 2 weeks for our 11th and 12th graders as we started third trimester today. The why this change now? Again, MDE and MDH started out very conservative with their approach. I think when they created the parameters in the Safe Learning Plan, they had the best information available to them at the time. But as they've seen how COVID has either interacted in schools or spread throughout communities, and what's the real driver behind that, they've slowly loosened some of that guidance and uncoupled from some of those early indicators that they used before. And they've also had learners in buildings since the beginning of the school year. And so that's given them kind of a real-time action study to see, all right, this is what we thought might happen versus what we're actually really seeing. And again, what is the driving behind any sort of transmission or positive cases that are coming in the building? And really what they've seen is transmission in schools primarily happens between adults and not between learners and adults or between learners. It's really those interactions, kind of those times where adults let their guard down a little bit, maybe in meetings, lunches, those types of things that they've seen that spread, and not so much in the learning spaces where people are following our mitigation strategies. And that would follow what we've seen in our buildings. Obviously, throughout the time we've had learners in buildings, we still have to continue to follow the quarantine guidelines. We've had positive cases in our buildings, but we have not had any transmission from a positive case in our building to somebody that's had to quarantine based on being in close contact, which again is good news, shows our mitigation strategies have been effective up until this point in time, and kind of backs up what they've been seeing. Another big thing that they've shifted is they've really allowed districts to move away from using that 14-day case rate as a primary metric. We've always had this 5% threshold that we've used for influenza and other illnesses that we've tracked. There have been times where buildings, it hasn't happened in Farmington for quite a long time, but there has been times where buildings have closed down. There was a district in the West Metro last year that started winter break early because they went over this 5% threshold with influenza type symptoms at that time. So if 5% of your learners or staff in a given week report influenza or COVID-19 like symptoms, that's an indicator we need to reconnect with our regional support team, those public health officials, and maybe look at potentially maybe a different plan for a period of time or something like that. So that's going to be one of the big things that we track and look at moving forward. The other piece is when we had to shift to distance learning in November, a lot of that was operational. So we're still tracking, the number of our staff that are in quarantine, the number of our learners in quarantine. What is that level that we can't handle anymore? And look at that from a perspective of logistically, what can we and can't we do if we reach a certain number of staff or learners out? Our quarantine guidance is not going to change. So even though they updated the Safe Learning Plan and allowed some different things, we are still required to follow the same quarantine guidance. Now, we did update that to follow some changes MDH made when we returned our elementary learners. So just for review for everybody, if you're a household close contact, that's unchanged. It's 14 days and you cannot test out of that. But if you're a non-household close contact, so it'd be a close contact identified in one of our buildings, one of our activities, that's a 10-day quarantine with a 7-day option. And that 7-day option is to take a PCR COVID test on or after day 5. And if that is negative, then families have the option to return their students, after that 7-day piece. So The other additional pieces, as we shared before, we continue to do our biweekly COVID testing program for all staff. So we've had 4 testing cycles. Today was our 4th, March 8th. Good news is we have not seen hardly any positives out of that, which is another kind of reaffirmation that the things that we're doing and the precautions that we're taking in our district are helping, and also gives us a little indication that what we're seeing from some of the other metrics, that the spread in and amongst our community is down locally. We're going to continue to require staff that are present in buildings to wear not only a face covering, but also a face shield. That is one of the biggest mitigation factors when we talk to MDH, when they look at other settings, specifically healthcare. That whole idea of a face covering and a shield is super effective, again, at preventing that transmission. And we're really concerned about protecting our adults. When we go back and look at where a lot of that spread happens, again, it's adult to adult. And so what can we do to provide as many layers of protection, as much mitigation to protect our adults in the building? So we're going to continue that. Our learners will continue to have to wear face coverings when engaging in indoor physical activities. You know, if we can't keep that 6 feet, we'll use clear plastic barriers between adults and learners for small group and individual stuff. One change is that we, at the secondary, we do have to maintain 3 feet of physical distancing. That is different than in the elementary buildings. In the elementary buildings, because we're able to keep kids cohorted by classroom, there is no requirement of that 3 feet of physical distancing. But when we return to an in-person learning model at our secondaries, there is a requirement, and that requirement is significant. When we did our planning last fall around in-person learning, we didn't do any planning with physical distancing because the guidance we received said basically you don't have to worry about physical distancing when you're in person. So that's thrown a little bit of a wrench into this, and one of the reasons why we pushed out the return into the end of March. We are still investigating, working with staff, working with buildings to ensure that we can create those instructional environments and maintain that 3 feet of physical distancing. Now, if our county numbers go below 10, then we don't have to worry about any physical distancing. Staff continue to make that 6 feet whenever possible, and if they have to go closer, to use those clear plastic shields. And then again, staff protecting each other from staff, maintaining 6 feet of physical distancing from staff. I'm going to turn this over to Chris to talk a little bit more about what this is going to look like at each level, and some of the things that we're still working on and trying to figure out logistically, so when the day comes, we're ready to go, because we still have some solutions that we need to find.
Yeah, Madam Chair and Board. So when the guidance came out, we took a look at the planning requirements that came along with it. And as Jason said, this is something we've been anticipating since last summer, with the 2 variables that we didn't know about. And that was the organizing to 3 feet. And then it was the additional 30 minutes of prep time per day for those staff members that are teaching distance learners and or hybrid. And so those were 2 requirements that we weren't quite aware of until it came out in the executive order in November and then in the guidance in February. So we looked at our calendar when it came out, and we started to identify some possible return dates that seemed to be more of a natural fit. We currently are just coming at the start of trimester 3. And so we took a look to see, would it be even possible to organize as quick as this week? And I think very, very quickly we learned that we're just going to simply need more time around a lot of these things. Our secondary administrators have been looking at their class rosters to see how they might be able to balance as they merge 2 cohorts together. At the high school, that was a little bit more easily done for 2 reasons. One is they, at last count, have about 24% of their learners that have chosen full-time distance learning. So naturally, when they merge those cohorts together, they are smaller in terms of total class size. And you normally wouldn't think of that when you think of a high school and class size. The other element of that has been, I've just blanked on that one. At the middle schools, many of their courses last all 3 trimesters, right? And so students have built a relationship with a group of learners in their cohort, and with that particular group of students that are across that cohort with the teacher as well. And so they've been trying to be mindful to plan as to what that might look like. We've also been taking a look at what does 3 feet mean when we plan, right? So traditionally, we've built a classroom where if you've got 30 learners, you've got 30 desks, and you might have 30 sets of materials. And while that's been the way that we've organized in the past, it isn't necessarily the way that we need to organize moving forward. So there's been a lot of work taking a look at space, taking a look at necessary furniture, how we might flex certain learners in and out of classroom spaces to help have a little bit smaller environments within a class for a period of time. Each of the 3 buildings has been including their staff as part of the planning and preparation. They all have their operational transition leadership teams that they've been engaging in a lot of dialogue to think about the what ifs. What does this look like when our learners come back? What do we need to be mindful of? At the high school, one of the most significant ones is lunch. You might think of the high school commons and associated hallway space as a significant amount of real estate. But when you start thinking about needing to feed about 400 learners in one lunch period, 3 feet can become problematic. And so we've been working with that senior open campus for quite some time. We've been taking a look at how we might reorganize our 9th, 10th, 11th graders to be spread out a little bit better. We've actually had the cafeteria set up now for over 1 week to 3 feet so that we can monitor what this looks like and figure out exactly what that balancing might need. The other thing that people might ask as we move forward is about the additional 30 minutes of prep time. And what we know is that at the elementary and the middle school, we organized to really 2 very different models of learning that were supported by people specific to that model. So with the Farmington Academy at the middle school, there is a group of teachers that have been dedicated to that group of learners the entire school year. That's what they've been solely focused on. And so they have also utilized that Flex Friday to support if they are a teacher in the Farmington Academy. At the high school, because they've been teaching 2, if not 3 models of the cohort distance learning and in-person learning, we just found it extremely problematic to figure out how we could go to a full 5 days a week. And that's one of the things that we talked about with our incident command team. The other element of this is that we did explore alternate transportation routes. Could we do a half a day on Friday for the high school? Could we do an early out, or could we do a late start? And it became cost prohibitive in terms of it wasn't something that had been budgeted for. And it also presented some staffing challenges in the fact that we may not necessarily have the appropriate number of drivers that we need based on those mid-tier routes. And so with all of those elements, our teams are still planning together to work on the nuances. They're going to continue to think about challenges that come about. And with today being the 8th, we feel good about the fact that we still have 3 weeks to work through a number of those elements.
And just to add on to Chris's point, unfortunately, well, fortunately or unfortunately, right, we had to make some decisions at the beginning of the year, especially to how we organized. And we were able to, in the elementary and in the middle schools, to create those individual kind of Tiger Academies, the Farmington Academies for our online learners. We looked at that and talked about that at the high school, but one of the trade-offs with that is it would severely limit the number of electives that students would be able to take. And even limit the number of higher level classes, learners would be able to take. And so by having our distance learners spread out through the entire high school, there's a benefit. They could all stay in their classes. They all get to take the things that they want. But now, because of this executive order, when we move back to in-person learning, we're still required to provide that extra half hour, which is really 2.5 hours a week for that additional prep. And so we really couldn't get around, that Friday piece without incurring additional costs or changing the system and stuff that we had. So we know that it's not perfect, but it's best on the circumstances that we have.
All right. Are there any questions or comments for our team here? I have one. When you mentioned earlier the good news about the majority of the staff having the opportunity to be vaccinated, and as vaccinations go forward and more people having that opportunity, do you think the standards in terms of masking and shields for those with vaccinations might be lifted at all? I know I'm giving you a crystal ball question. It just kind of came out of my head.
Yep. So that's a good question. We actually, Chris and I met with we've been meeting with our FEA executive board on a monthly basis just to kind of get feedback. And the shield question has continued to come up, and I understand it. It's nobody likes it, right? It's not a great thing. It makes it hard. And what I told the executive board today is that when we get back from our spring break, that should be a point where everybody that's wanted, like I shared, wanted the vaccination should have gotten their second one. And I'll take that question to MDH and see what their reply is. If we get an indication that you can replace the shield mitigation with the vaccination mitigation, we'll most certainly make that. Again, for us, we're trying to be probably more conservative on that end of things, just from the information that we've gotten from MDH about the strength of that mitigation strategy and stuff. And so until I asked them about a week and a half ago, and their reply was, nope, it hasn't changed right now. So I think it's a good question to ask when we get to that point and we get everybody probably that 2 weeks past their second dose so they can get the full thing. So I don't have a crystal ball, but as we see, right, they are changing guidance around vaccinations, right? They're saying that, if people are fully vaccinated, they can start to gather in small groups and things. So a month and now things could change, and we will most certainly respond and do what we can to maybe relieve some of those things that are pinch points from people, even though they're really safe. So
I appreciate that. That's something I've been hearing a lot, and that it does seem like the CDC keeps changing new guidelines. And there was something that came out recently today regarding that. So I appreciate that. One other thing, I just have to joke around. I see the 3 feet, and I imagine everyone's going to get like a tiger yardstick,
So here's the thing. I mean, we just, we're going to organize to 3 feet in our instructional spaces. And just like we talked with our elementary, our elementary people, that you're not going to be, it's going to be impossible to be the social distancing police, right? So we're going to create spaces in our spot and get kids there, and then we'll work with them and stuff like that. But we'll do the best we can, but it's going to be, we're not going to get little bubbles and stuff with people to walk around with and bump into each other. But I still have my 6-foot noodle back here. You can kind of see it. There it is in the corner. If anybody, I could cut it in half and we could share it. So we'll do the best we can with that and make sure our spaces are to that 3 feet.
Grace, do you have a comment or question? Go ahead.
I do. I'm just curious, and I don't know, I guess, if this is decided yet or if it's already been said and I missed it with all the different considerations, but I'm curious, when we at the high school go back to 4 days a week, both cohorts, what threshold would it take for us to have to shift back to either hybrid or like full distance? Is there a certain number of cases, or is it like percentage? And is that different from the cases that were at the beginning of fall? Has it been like higher lifted or lowered? Yeah.
Yep. So what we would track, Grace, we would start by tracking the number of students each week that have flu and COVID-like symptoms. And when that percentage gets to 5%, then we would start to have some discussions with our public health people, Dakota County and MDH, to see what their recommendations are. And, we haven't made a decision yet, but, it's probably more likely if we had to shift, we would maybe shift to a distance learning model based on some of the feedback that you and other students gave, and do that for a shorter period of time, and then come back to in-person after we have a little bit of a pause. But that first metric that we're going to use will be that flu and COVID-like symptoms number. And the other one that'll have an impact on that too is the number of learners and staff that are in quarantine. If we start getting 10%, 15% of our staff in quarantine, again, we can't function that way, and we'll have to make a decision to a model. And same thing, if we start getting high numbers of learners in quarantine, it's really hard to do both of those things. So those will be some of the big things. And to your question, that will be and is different than what we did at the beginning of the year, where we focused solely on our county case numbers.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, I think we're ready to go on to the next step. Is there a motion to acknowledge reports and communications?
I can make a motion to acknowledge receipts of reports and communications as presented.
Second.
Motion by Coletta, second by Christensen. Roll call vote, please.
Member Doyle?
Yes.
Member Coletta?
Yes.
Member Simmons?
Yes.
Member Christensen?
Yes.
Member Carraro? Member Carraro?
Steve, we can't hear you again.
Chair Saucer?
Yes. Motion passes. We have acknowledgement of receipt of reports and communications. All right, now we're moving to our administrative action portion of the agenda with Mr. Dan Miller, and we've got a variety of items. My suggestion, we just go point by point and let you have the floor.
All right. Thank you, Chair Saucer, members of the board, Superintendent Berg. Yes, I do have a number of things, so we'll try to get through it in under 2 hours. I'm kidding. Okay, I'm kidding. So before we jump in, because there are a number of items, first just want to kind of do a little bit of an overview regarding these 4 projects, but more specifically, how they fit in context-wise with funds that we have remaining in our 2015 bond, as well as our long-term facilities bond for the TLLC. And so, we've talked about this a number of times, but just kind of as a refresher, and as well for the community, our 2015 bonds, we've accomplished a lot of different projects with that money. We've been very, very fortunate in terms of so many projects coming in, quite frankly, well below budget, and the amount of projects that we've been able to accomplish has been quite astounding, to be quite honest. And even with that, we still have a significant amount of funds available that we need to tackle, spend down, and use for projects here over the next 6-ish or so months. In addition to those funds, if you recall, we bonded, long-term facilities bonded for $10 million for the significant mechanical renovations at the TLLC site. Once again, that particular project came in pretty significantly under what we had originally budgeted for. And so what that means is that we also have some dollars left in that particular account as well. So when we pool those dollars together and look at what we have available, we have a little bit over $8.5 million is what our current estimate is, about $8,515,000 ish. So I say that because we'll go through these 4 projects, tonight here at the board meeting, and I'll just kind of give you the number in advance, but we'll break it out as we go through. But the projects that we're looking for approval to take out to bid tonight are about $8,150,000. So that leaves us about $365,000 remaining in our various bond accounts, kind of as a buffer in reserve, so to speak, based upon what our current architects and engineering estimates are. Now, obviously, we tend to try to be on the conservative side of things. And so not only is there that reserve that's there, but obviously we've got reserve and contingency built into every single one of these individual projects. And so we're trying to be ultra conservative in terms of, taking these projects out for bid. Quite honestly, our hope is that if all of these projects come in and get bid, either at or below what we're currently budgeting, we do have one more project that we would like to take out to bid, yet sometime late spring, and that would be renovating or repaving the TLLC parking lot downtown. That was the only facility, the only parking lot that we did not touch with our bond dollars thus far. And we did that on purpose because we knew that we were going to be doing some work on the site. And quite frankly, we didn't want heavy equipment down there and do damage. So, and with the current estimates that we have for that project, if everything that we present tonight comes in on budget, we believe we would still have adequate funds to get that project done as well. But like I said, it's kind of our buffer right now, and we're being conservative. But just to kind of give you the overall context of where we stand budget-wise, and quite frankly, it's very favorable for us, and hopefully, something that will benefit the community, and us as a school district well into the future for 25 to 30 years if we can get some of these projects done now. So with that, I will jump into first one here, which will be our roofing projects. And hoping everybody can see that. If I can just get a confirmation, that would be great. Good to go. Thank you. So in the resolutions, we are actually going to be taking these two projects out as separate bids, but they're basically the same concept. And so I've kind of grouped them together from a presentation standpoint. But our Meadowview and Aiken Road roofs, we've had them looked at a number of times over the past 3 to 5 years. And we knew that we were kind of pushing it when it came to needing to have them replaced. So just some, and I may not read through all of this verbatim, but we've had continuous water issues, water penetration issues on both of these roofs, and the issues are becoming more frequent and more significant or severe. It's kind of a little bit like rolling the dice here in terms of having a catastrophic failure, which is something that we want to try to avoid at all costs, because unfortunately, water damage inside of a building can get very expensive very quickly, and so we're trying to avoid that. Both of these roofs are rubber roofs. That's the so EPDM style, which is basically a rubber roof. They are different in terms of the way that they are currently on the buildings. Meadowview, if you were able to take a look at it from above, you would see that there's a bunch of rock on top of the roof at Meadowview. It's a ballasted roof, which means that the rubber membrane is not really physically adhered to the insulation below. It uses the rocks to keep it down. Not uncommon. But then the other thing that allows for you to see quite quickly when you go up there is that membrane, when it gets old, it loses its elasticity and it starts to shrink. And so what happens is it will start to pull away from the edges of the roof and literally slope down towards it. And so that's oftentimes where we start to see our failure, is as it shrinks, it literally will start to tear at the edges. And so we've been battling that the last couple of years. We've had to make patches, had to do some work, actually had to go up and start cutting the roof, cutting the membrane apart a little bit so we can put big patches in so that we don't get a significant failure. Aiken Road is a little bit different in that it's still a rubber roof, but it is actually adhered via adhesive to the insulation below it. So you wouldn't see any rock or anything like that up there. But we still run into the same issues where over time the rubber just breaks down primarily due to UV rays, so on and so forth, becomes brittle, starts to shrink, And then when that happens, you start to get cracks and tears in that membrane, and then you're chasing leaks all the time. So, and as I mentioned, there's some spots on that roof where you can't even tell where the original roof was anymore because there's so many patches in it, and they're just it's really hard to start chasing down leaks when you've got so many patches. So as a general overview to these projects, what we would be looking to do would be to remove that existing rubber roof and the ballast, so all of the rock off of the roof at Meadowview. We would need to remove some insulation on both roofs. There are a couple of smaller sections that there is no fire rated base layer there, which is now a code requirement. So sometimes codes change, and when you make modifications or updates or changes to things, you have to meet new code requirements. So that would mean that they would have to take the insulation all the way down, the roof all the way down to the steel deck. We would have to install that fire rated base layer in those spaces and then install new insulation over the top of that. And it says mechanically install because that is important. When you go away from a ballasted roof, you have to literally take large screws and anchor plates and drill them into the metal deck. Otherwise, there's nothing to hold the roof down. And so literally, the roof can become a big sail, a balloon, and lift the roof and the insulation right off with it. Where there is fire rated base layers, we will try to reuse all of the existing insulation that's there, and we will put new insulation down over the top of that. The parapet, which is kind of like the outer rim of the roof, has kind of a sheet metal cap and flashing that's there. We will have to reinstall the cap. And I bring that up because sometimes there's metal flashing that goes down a little bit below that. And that we will not be replacing. So sometimes you get a little bit of color variation that's there, so it might not match exactly. Meadowview also has some additional issues with some flashing that we're going to have to be rectified. Won't go into all the details of it, but just some things that we need to fix that in the original design of the building are problematic. These roofs will both be 25-year full warranted roofs. Life expectancy on these roofs is greater than 30 years. So as I mentioned before, this will hopefully get all of our roofs in the entire district well beyond that 25-year mark from now. So we will be in a very good position district-wide. And then there are some insulation code requirements that have changed. So we will be adding some insulation, which will also then improve, some of our energy efficiency pieces. And then just to give you an idea as to how much we're talking about, a square is 100 square feet. So you can see Meadowview, obviously a larger building than Aiken Road, and that will translate into the differences in cost that you'll see here in a little bit. And then just also as a reminder, we do have some kindergarten additions that were put on, and neither of those two kindergarten additions are obviously in the scope of this project, as those roofs are relatively new. Not going to read through all of this, but this basically shows schematic here of Meadowview. Those areas that are the A marked areas, those are the spaces that will basically the existing roof will come off, and then new insulation will be put down, and then the roof on top. There's a small section B up there, kind of in the top left-hand corner. That's where we're missing some fire rating, and that roof will have to basically be stripped down to the metal decking and then rebuilt back up all the way. The C areas are areas, they're canopies basically, that don't really have a lot for code requirements and insulation value requirements. So there's just a little bit of work that needs to be done on those. And then over on the right-hand side, where it says no re-roofing, that is the kindergarten addition at Meadowview. Aiken Road, kind of a similar thing there. So the A's basically take off the existing, put some new insulation on to get it up to code, put the new rubber roof on. Area B has to go all the way down to the metal deck and then build it back up. The C areas there, once again, canopies that being that they're not internal, not much for code requirements there. And then over on the left-hand side there, that is the new kindergarten addition at Aiken Road that will not be touched. So from a scheduling standpoint, obviously today, looking for the board's permission to take these two projects out for bid. We would be looking to have our bid opening on April 6th, which is a Tuesday. And then back to the board, assuming that we get bids that we are comfortable with and are within our budget for board approval to award the contracts. And then we would be looking to begin work as soon as school is out in June, with the projects being significantly complete before students return in August. So construction cost estimates. At Meadowview, about 2.6 million is our estimate, and Aiken Road at about 1.6 for a total of $4.2 million between those two roofs, with those expected funding source to be from our 2015 bond dollars. So I guess with that, well, this may be kind of quick or maybe not quick enough for some. If you have any questions.
All right, Member Simmons, I see you have your hand up.
Thanks, Dan, for the overview. I have two questions.
Yes.
The first is the timeline. 6 days for between bid opening and when the board would award contracts. Is that typical? That seems like a short amount of time.
So yes, it's not atypical. So what that would mean then is, so our bid opening, so the engineers have assured me that, because what I relay to them is that I need to be able to have, letters of, recommendation letters, so on and so forth, to Miss Jensen by 4 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, so that can hit the board packet. So they'll have enough time. We're opening bids in the morning on the Tuesday. So they will have the remainder of the workday on Tuesday and Wednesday, to do any checking that they need to. And quite honestly, obviously we don't know for sure who's going to bid the job, but jobs of this size, that there aren't a lot of contractors that are out there that will bid on these. And so most of the time it's just them doing their due diligence regarding whether or not that the contractor will hold to their bid value. Sometimes we run into concerns if we end up with some outlier that's really low, that they misbid it in some way, shape, or form. I haven't experienced that. In the district in any of the projects that I've worked on thus far, but it could happen. And so if that sort of a thing happened, then we would have to adjust the schedule. But right now we don't have any reason to believe that they wouldn't be able to, take a look at what those bids are compared to our estimates and make any follow-up calls, to put anybody at ease for accepting those bids.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.